are about to start, and some guests are appearing, and I will add them to the feed. We're going to talk about. I should have disabled my pop-ups. We're going to talk about technical debt. What are the trends and how we got here? And we have combined maybe more than 200 years of working experience in this sort of big panel, if you will. And this started after we had a Twitter big chat. I'm adding folks. Rohit is added. Hey, Rohit, how are you?
Doing good, Sarbjeet. How are you?
Good. And I'm adding Rob right now. Hey, Rob, what's up?
Hello, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, this is off the cuff. We just proposed it yesterday or something, day before yesterday, and it's like, let's do it. It's it'll be a little bit rough because a lot of people are going to be here. And who else is? Todd is here. Hey, Todd, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Good, thank you. So
Thanks
I
for
think we'll wait for. Sorry, go ahead. What? Enjoying your tea? All right. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, folks. If you're listening, I hope somebody's listening. Yeah, I have 6 people on. So we are going to talk about technical debt. Let's actually jump into it. We have about 10 people. Anil, thanks. No, Neil is my brother-in-law. He's in Seattle. He's a techie, and he said family's watching. Next time, Neil, I'll add you there. So we'll get started, and but like maybe 5-6 more people will join in, and then some people can leave. I always think that Twitter, all these live conversations are like a water cooler of like in a digital sense. Like we come, we talk, we disperse, right, kind of thing. So let's start with Rob. Rob, tell us about your understanding of technical debt. When did you hear that term first time? I can share mine later. Oh, you're on mute, I think.
There we go. Yeah. Classic problem. Good morning, everyone. I first heard a video from Ward Cunningham from some time ago talking about technical debt, and he was comparing it to the finance industry, which is where he worked at the time for Ycash. And it was there, he discussed that it's kind of like having a credit card, and you need to keep that paid off. And otherwise, you're just going to accumulate more debt and more interest to where it gets to the point where you can no longer overcome that. The other definition I've heard is things such as shortcuts, workarounds, postponing decisions that accumulate in the technical stack.
Yeah, I heard this term when I was working at PeopleSoft. We got some training, in these companies we get trained. I was a developer back then. It was around, I think, maybe 99 or 2001, some time frame there. So I was intrigued by the term and then the way he described it, the trainer. And this is, as a developer, actually, we all have our vantage points. Like not everybody on this panel is going to be developer. I'm adding Bobby, Mike, oh my good friend, and Joanne. Joanne, thanks for joining. She has a little less time. I think she will be with us for a few minutes. So I heard that term, and as we all have our vantage points. So as a developer, I always thought after that point that it's like we make design compromises, right? While we are writing software and or deploying systems, it can be in operations sense or in creation. That means development. So mostly my job was development. So like we used to use waterfall model. Like every 6 to 9 months, we'll release the software. There's a PRD, and then we write software, we throw it to QA, and then we are fixing bugs. And you guys know all the sort of whole 9 yards. And then we took some shortcuts and we made some compromises because of the time constraints and the money constraints. We didn't have enough people and or time, and we committed the release to the market, like to the customer base, like we're going to release on this date, right? So that's what my understanding is of technical debt. And I have seen some folks say that it includes cultural debt and process debt, and stuff like that. But I will ask Todd to give his couple of his perspective on this. He has written like a couple of books on cloud and DevOps and how to make us agile.
Well, thank you. As a businessman first, we talk about debt. You've got, obviously, we got the technical component that, and I always put myself on the fence because I'm not a developer. I am a businessman. I'm a veteran. So I approach many of the things that I look at from a human factors vantage point. And really what it is the cost of doing business. I think that has to be at the top of the layer before we drill down. So when I'm looking at technical debt as a business person who's capitalized the expense or who has been able to offshore that, for lack of a better term, so that it becomes from an operational, a CapEx to an operational perspective, I think that's where we sometimes have trouble between the technical folks and the non-technical folks and explaining to them what the value of that car is. We've spoken, it was funny to watch you all talk over the week about legacy, how we've put ourselves in a box. So it really is, it's cultural challenges from my vantage point. What is the cost of doing business? It doesn't matter if it's technical or human resources. And from there, making sure that we're all singing from a common hymnal. So to me, I like to talk about the total cost, the return on investment, not just technical debt, because it tends to pull us back into the developer world. And that's where, again, the non-technical folks get lost. So you're not even communicating to them at that point because they've seized up, especially older folks, because of the cloak and dagger and the things that we did back 20 years ago and holding everything close to our chest. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think you are talking from your vantage point, and I think the sheer existence of this term tells us the disconnect between tech people and the business people, and why we have this term about technical debt. Like, why don't we call it, debt or product debt or something like that? Very generic term, right? So, Bobby and Mike, thanks for joining. I will get to you. I'm going to go to Rohit first. Before you guys. Rohit, shed some light on this. When did you hear this term first? And what do you do actually, a little bit, so briefly?
So I'm on the, what we all were discussing on the Twitter chat, I'm on the business side. Mostly been on marketing and digital teams, like a technologist by background. Mm-hmm. But last few years, totally on digital marketing and business side. So that's what I do currently. I work for a very large organization. I run their digital marketing and e-commerce. And this term, like Sarbjeet, as you were talking about, first time I think I heard it a couple of years back, and I was said, oh, what is this? I can't even understand, because from the days of my technology as a developer, of course, as a developer, I never cared about finance. I never cared about these things because all my job was somebody tells me what to do, I go and build it. That's all I was doing. And last few years, when I got introduced to this term, it was because as I specifically do a lot of work on the digital experience and marketing technology platform side, where all companies I work for, I have owned those platforms and I run those platforms, and also e-commerce side. So what I've heard about it is there was something we did either before me or during my time, is something that we did because of constraints around time, constraints around budget that we had around hey, we have to go faster to the market. Yes, that integration, if you do it in the right way, it will take 6 months, but we cannot wait because there is a $25 million opportunity sitting on the table. So we have to go fast. And at that point of time, we go to our product team and we sit with the architects and we think about solutions. And there is one solution that is faster go to market, enables most of the MVP things, but it's not something that can sustain for a long time. But as business owners, because as business owners or business leaders, you make that decision as uh, like like you were talking about total cost of ownership. You look at it like, if I have a tech debt of $500,000 and overall cost of like other things, including marketing, product, or technical, everything else is another $2-3 million. If I can invest, total cost is around $2-3-4-5 million, and I can get $25 million out of it. Business leaders take that decision, and that's what, when I was introduced, and what's my experience with this thing has been.
Yeah, actually, from my vantage point, from my experience, the hardest problem about technical data is that we cannot easily measure it. We don't put it on the project plan for the next release. Even though we are not doing waterfall sort of kind of development anymore, we do agile, and we are releasing software like multiple times a day. But still, we still make some compromises or some sort of deals that we are not going to do this feature now, or we're going to do that feature this week, right, or this month, and it just goes on. But we tend to forget what we have left behind. I think one part of the problem is the velocity of change and how fast we develop software, and how hastily we construct software, I would say. So Bobby, thanks for joining. Are you on? Yeah. I can see you moving a little bit. You look a little bit frozen, your video.
I'm here. Sorry.
How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. I love your comments all the time on Twitter. They're always to the point. Not that other people are not to the point, but everybody is great. But thanks for being here. So shed some light. Like in general, we have actually, I think we're trying to define the term technical debt. What's your vantage point, and what you have done in the last let's say a couple of decades, which makes you talk about this, or makes you interested in this topic to talk about it?
Yeah. Thanks, Sarbjeet. So I'm the CTO of a cloud computing startup called Cloud General, based out of Charlotte, which I like to call Silicon South, right? Because all innovation doesn't come out of the West Coast. We're not just country bumping sitting on tractors in the Southeast. We do know how to innovate down here. And so I've been living the world of cloud computing startups for the past 8 years. And before that, I did stints with Intel and Bank of America. So the corporate part and the startup part, helping a lot of enterprises connect to this cloud thing. And I hear technical debt tossed around all the time by executives and application teams as you're wrestling with how to do things. And I'll give two thoughts I want to throw out around technical debt, Sarbjeet. One, all technical debt isn't bad. And I'll say that some technical debt came because people ran out of time. Some technical debt is because that tech is out of season. Some things are just old, right? The framework is old. It's not that it's broken. It's legacy with it. It's just served this time. But the other thing that I'll offer, I always think in terms of analogies, right? Technical debt to me goes back to something that I think Todd talked about. Technical debt is adjacent to another one that we're having, which is we're looking at cost as a proxy for value. Because when you don't know the value of something, you're always going to underinvest or over-improve. So I think about application portfolio like a house, right? If you don't know the value of the house and value of the other things in the neighborhood, you're either going to not invest enough or over-improve it. And I'll break it down this way. You have things that are maintenance related, you have things that are repair related, and things that are upgrade related. And the reality is the people in the business often that are holding the purse strings don't want to fund maintenance and repairs if they're not getting upgrades. Don't repair the windows if I'm not getting granite countertops. So we've got the massaging that we have to do often in the enterprises. Let me eat the elephant of fixing the hole in the roof, because otherwise I'm going to have a 4K TV and it's going to be raining on my head. That's what we've got to be able to combine appropriately to make sure that we're connecting with the business.
I love that analogy, actually. You can have a broken roof and 4K TV, actually, and that's what we sometimes tend to do in tech when we make tech investments. We always hop onto the latest and bleeding edge, and especially the developer community. Actually, I'm a developer at heart, and still write code whenever I can. So I'm part of the problem, if you will. But on the other side, operations want to bring in some stability. So there's always push and pull between these two groups at every company, which every tech organization, we can say. So Mike, I love your room. Shit is hard. Do it. Love that back there. And I know you're a Peloton, like a fan and all that stuff. So we missed each other a couple of weeks back. We were going to meet in person for a coffee. Thanks for being here. And you have done some great work at different companies, including a big brand, which we all watch almost every day, Netflix. You were a CIO there, right? So what's your take on the problem of technical debt, or if you want to call it something else? I think you called something else yesterday on Twitter. Was it you or somebody else?
I don't think it was me, but but who knows at this point?
Yeah, I know.
I'd say the motivational slogan behind me for fitness is probably apropos to technical debt and managing it. It is hard, and you have to do it anyway. But I think going back to kind of the history with me of when I first heard the term, I think it was probably 2009. Mm-hmm. So I was helping lead the merger of companies that were in 3 locations in Germany, 1 in Salt Lake City, and then 1 in Palo Alto. So quite the cultural dichotomy. Mm-hmm. And we're also trying to platform those products to make them SaaS. And it was early days of this term called this acronym SaaS. So given the history of all of these different companies, there was a fair amount of technical debt. There was also, I think Todd mentioned cultural debt or cultural differences that we were dealing with. So that's when I first heard it, just kind of during the diligence phase. And then joining Netflix at the time when they were pivoting from DVD only to streaming and splitting the company, not splitting the company, and then moving from a monolithic Java Oracle stack to pure cloud with microservices and the refactoring that went there. But I think everybody got behind that initiative, and I don't think I ever heard the term technical debt or even refactoring. And then in other experiences, I think you have to be careful that developers love to tinker and refactor, and those refactoring initiatives and tinkering gets masqueraded by the term technical debt, because it's like, oh, we have to refactor and do this new framework or move this architecture because it's technical debt, and there's no real quantification behind that. So I think tech leaders need to be aware of that kind of, once again, cultural underpinning, and sniff that out. And then now I'm in a fairly new role, so I'm part of the tech diligence team at Palo Alto Strategy Group. So we do tech and commercial diligence for large private equity firms that are looking at more vintage, not legacy targets. Mm-hmm. And part of our diligence, especially on the tech side, is looking at technical debt, but not from a bad lens, but from the lens of what's the level of investment needed to modernize the platform. And in private equity terms, what's the value creation plan, instead of looking at it as a negative. So we never view it as a negative. It's going to exist to some degree in any organization, but then it's like, what do you need to do, both people and monetarily, to address it? So I think, to tie that up, all technical debt, I think Bobby said, is not bad. I think what's bad is when you don't understand it or don't pay attention to it, much like financial debt. And I think the credit card situation for, unfortunately, a lot of people in the U.S. pre and now during COVID has gotten worse, and there's not a lot of diligence, if you will, around maintaining financial debt. And I think those bad practices or approaches make their way into the technical world.
Yeah, I think it's a good kind of segue that you mentioned that you are working with private equity folks who are taking on these companies which are kind of going sideways, and they want to polish them and sell them to somebody else and revive and stuff like that. So approaching it from the business point of view, and I wish we could do that within big corporations, and where we treat IT as a business, and we take a look at the assets, IT assets, or the technology stack as business, which exists separate. But that's not the case. We tried actually doing that. I was at Visa when we split a company called Visa from Visa International to Innovant, and then we were outsourcing work to Innovant, and then we failed actually after a few years. So we just brought it back into one company. So these things are hard to do within a company, to measure the technical debt in financial terms. So Down, thanks for being here. You write a lot about it, and you call that the future of IT is complexity management. I like that sort of tagline, if you will. Let's kind of pivot to like a little bit, like after defining the technical, unless you want to just say a few words on the definition itself. How can we make sure that our technical debt is not ballooning beyond our ability to pay it back, or it will drag us down, or it will put the business in jeopardy as we move forward? How can we reduce it?
So the big challenges with technical debt is that there's a lot of things that have to be done for an IT project or a digital product, facing the external world to get done. And the one thing you can't get more of is time. And so a lot of expedient decisions are made in order to make the make the schedule or do whatever you need to do to ship that product. And the issue with technical debt is that rarely, I think it's one of the other speakers that mentioned, you rarely go back and actually address that challenge. If it works well enough, that's usually what you're going to end up with, right? That's the real challenge. And you accumulate this enough, and you have what really has become one of the largest off-balance liabilities, off-balance sheet liabilities that are in most organizations today. You're not required to put this on in your accounting, yet most organizations have tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in technical debt, right? And this is what's holding them back from IT modernization. It's holding them back from digitally transforming quickly enough, because a lot of that has to be paid down before you can move and do things, right? With that being there, it's very hard to go to the board and say, I want $50 million, and what you're going to get is what you have today. It's just going to be properly designed, right? Properly architected, properly deployed, whatever it is. And so, the smart approach is, to tie it in with some improvement. And now you're changing two things. So it ends up being high risk, right? So if you're trying to upgrade something and improve it, now you're bringing in a lot of extra challenges that you don't need to. You're buying in risk. And so what happens is a lot of technical debt is allowed to lie fallow. And it's very difficult for a CIO to go into an organization and say, I've done an audit, and your previous CIOs have accumulated $250 million in technical debt that you guys need to come up with the money to solve. They didn't create the problem, but now everyone's got to deal with it. Now, what happens is the easiest by far thing to do is to kick the can down the road. And so that means that digital native organizations that don't have good hygiene, because it really is a lot of this is a architectural hygiene problem, a coding hygiene problem, a deployment hygiene problem, where you're just not biting the bullet and getting it done right the first time. And high-performing digital organizations tend to do a lot up front to make sure that they don't end up incurring too much technical debt, because they know their entire business can be sunk. If your digital business is dependent upon your IT capabilities, which most digital businesses are entirely dependent on their IT capabilities, then you don't want to end up with that swamp. But enterprises tend to be able to, because they're not as dependent, they've been able to get by with a lot more technical debt off the books, because no one's monitoring it. If you're required by law, for example, to put that, accounting laws required you to put IT technical debt on as a liability, you'd bet that because it's visible, it would suddenly be managed a lot better. So that's kind of the state of affairs right now.
Yeah, I think it's interesting working with some Wall Street firms while working with EMCs of the world and VMwares of the world. I came across this fact that they have insurances behind the businesses, and when the insurance companies insure them, they also take a look at their systems, like how robust they are, and they do deep dive into those things. I was like kind of stunned to know that it's not everywhere. It's not in every industry. In financial, it is there. So robustness of your technology stack actually impacts your ability to survive, and that's how the people who finance your risk, if you will, they look at that, right? Insurance companies.
Yeah, well, the folks in private equity on this session even mentioned that they really do due diligence to make sure they're not getting a rat's nest in terms of you have IT that barely functions because you can't evolve it very quickly because it has a variety of suboptimal decisions that were made for many years. So yeah.
Oh, trust me, we've seen our share of rat's nests. It's how much you need to invest to untangle it.
Yeah, exactly.
And the fact somebody is trying to sell the company to private equity is that's, I mean, like most of it will be, I think, in that state, I guess. I've seen a couple of them too. So let's pivot a little bit. Actually, we talked about the waterfall model. Like now things are changing gradually, right? And we are in the microservices world right now, and there's a lot more talk about it. We still have a lot of legacy. We know that, right? So that legacy is more like we're not refactoring that much of that. We're rewriting much of that, I think, as we go forward. How do new paradigms help us either address, like, let's take a look at the positives of the new paradigms like microservices and the serverless, and it's already microservice, if you will, and or how do they make the problem worse? Like, can we get into like more debt quickly because somebody can just write a function and function as a service, or we call it serverless, and then we write a bunch of functions and we don't know how to manage it anymore. Like, how do we sort of take control of the situation? If some developer leaves and they have done serverless, and what do we do with it, right? Stuff like that. So like, how do we contain the problem? So what are the pluses and what are the minuses of new paradigms? Anybody can take that. Okay.
So yeah, this is Rob. From microservices or serverless standpoint, there's a couple of things I've seen in my consulting. Well, first of all is completely retraining our staff of how to think about architecting and how to program for that. I think second is you can still have a mess through tightly coupled architectures. And so that's something that you need to observe. And I think third is, what's the definition of a function? If you have 5,000 lines of code for a microservice and it's probably performing multiple things, I highly doubt it's just doing one thing. So there's still problems. It doesn't matter, in terms of traditional architecture versus this microarchitecture. There's still things that we need to think about.
Anybody else?
I'd love to jump in there just to piggyback on that. So I start with the premise, Sarbjeet, that everything new isn't good and everything old isn't bad. And there are a lot of things that are widespread. That doesn't mean they're well proven. So we hear about a lot of things. There's a lot of technology. And at this point, honestly, if you talk to a lot of quote unquote experts, they say if you're doing serverless and containers and serverless containers, you're already behind. I'm not convinced of that, because we haven't convinced. I'm not convinced that all those new things add value to the applications. They add excitement for the developers and complexity, but they're not necessarily make the application any more valid. And so in some cases, we're making a more technologically exciting mess. We're not really transforming. We're just automating a lot of the bad stuff that we did. And so, I go back to my thesis for this year. Y'all have heard me say this, some of y'all on Twitter. Tech is the easy part. Data and behavior are the hard parts. And the thing that we're doing is, I'll use an analogy for parenting, right? Some of us that are saying that we're kind of experts in a lot of this cloud stuff, like microservice, like saying that you're an expert parent, but your oldest child is only a teenager. It's too early to declare victory yet. And some of these paradigms are not mature enough to say, yeah, we figured it out. You're not far enough along yet. Honestly, you're still in the honeymoon phase. So trying to say that you understand this thing and you're going to roll it out. No, some of these things, Sarbjeet, I argue, are still science fair projects, and we're not something that we're going to run our whole business off of. It's a kind of risk because it's exciting, but it's not proven yet. I put Kubernetes in that category. I know some people aren't going to like that. I call Kubernetes the air fryer of cloud, right? People want to say it makes everything better. Kubernetes doesn't even make chicken wings. It's a machine that makes something that makes chicken wings, right? It's a platform to make platforms. I'm not convinced. A lot of us are really drinking the Kool-Aid because we see stuff a whole lot. And here's what I think the real issue is. Let me put a fine point on it. We are struggling in cloud and in life to evaluate better versus different. Because there's so many different things that are coming at us. There's pressure to abandon what might have worked if we stayed time over target. We always want to go to embrace the new thing. And sometimes you need to fail and tweak as opposed to wiping the slate clean and starting over. That's what we're doing now.
I,
Hey,
I like the better versus what was the better versus what?
Better versus different.
Different, yeah. Like we all want to be different. Actually, that's the developer sort of mindset. Like we want to be different. I want the developers actually the way they work is that they want to put something on their resume. I did that. I mean, I will admit that, right? So like I'm doing the latest stuff. Like I'm doing like like the Node.js took hold of developers like what it started doing that like 7-8 years back. Everybody wants to do Node. They want to write code in that language, and they want to use certain framework, and yeah, it just people just flock there, and yeah, there's so many factors like education, the continuous education of developer community, and somebody said that like having time tested sort of practices, like how do we practice technology here in this organization, how do we put stuff out there, how much due diligence we do upfront. And we all know there are layers of architecture, right? There's a base layer, and there's like we used to have middleware. We still have those things, but we call those different things differently now. But we have like then on top is application and user interfaces and all that stuff. So like where are we making the compromises? If we are making the compromises in the base layer, that would be hard to rectify later on, as compared to if you're making compromises in the application layer, which you can easily rewrite or refactor or even retire that application and get something like SaaS or something like that, right? So it matters like where you're making those compromises. I think technical debt compromises are made also while you're purchasing technology, not only when you're building it yourself. When you're purchasing, you make some compromises at that point too. So
hey, Sarbjeet, I'll just add one more point on that perspective. So I'm sorry, like I forgot your name, Bobby, right? You were speaking. Yeah, Bobby very well said. Like I'll just add another thing to it. I personally feel being like myself a developer who have done serverless also. I have done microservices, and of course APIs is all my career, beginning years of my technical career. The challenge is also leadership. I feel like we lack leaders at many places who truly understand like those technologies, first of all. Secondly, and doesn't mean you have to know everything, but it's like you don't truly understanding what those technologies can do, what are the emerging technologies that are in the market, and things like those. And like you just don't listen and just go for whatever a consultant or your technical team is suggesting. You go and you see what is the best and whether it is the right thing to do at this point of time or not. Even serverless is cool, but why do you really need it? If you don't need it, you don't need it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think teaming like a team, it's kind of like also like you got to love your developers, but at the same time you got to tame them a little bit in a certain way that they're not just going out there in the wild and just grabbing anything they want to try and playing with it and then injecting sort of risk to the systems, right? So like any other patterns you see, like I have one sort of bullet points I wrote for us to talk about, like any patterns you see, like certain verticals or certain personas exhibit like more of injection into the amplifying this problem versus like certain personas don't.
Well, I can tell you one place where technical debt accumulates very consistently and very significantly, and that is in IT customization. So the classic anti-pattern is you decide you're going to finally digitize your whole supply chain. You get a big ERP system in, but it doesn't work the way your business works. And supply chains are large, complex things. And so you say, hey, our special sauce is a lot of it's in our supply chain. We don't want to adopt a generic ERP system, so we're going to adapt this world-class ERP system to the special ways that we do business. So that usually is a multi-year effort, and they do that. And then the next version of the ERP platform comes out, and it's significantly upgraded. It works differently. And now you've got to redo all of those customizations because they're now trapped behind a wall of technical debt. You can't move to the new version of the ERP system until you redo those $50 million worth of customizations that you did. That was supposed to be so valuable, all right? And so, and it's this ever-evolving cycle. I go into organizations today, and big companies have more than one ERP system because they've acquired other companies. So they have technical debt on that order too. They've got all of this unintegrated, fragmented supply chains because it's so complicated to integrate and standardize on one ERP system because you're going to redo all the customizations or redo all the supply chains again. And then you're behind generations on your ERP system because you don't want to spend that $50 million. You'd rather do it next year instead of hitting your balance sheet this year. So that is a classic anti-pattern. It's one of the reasons customization is not in favor right now, unless it's really, really strategically differentiating. And it's creating this monoculture in businesses where they just do whatever the software does now, right? It's fascinating because nobody wants to take on that technical debt. So one of the biggest remaining ones then is that having all these multiple CRM systems, multiple ERP systems. Every large organization I go into and I look at their spreadsheet, you can't believe how many they have. Every database you've ever heard of, right? Yeah. They've got 5 ERP systems, 3 CRM systems, and it's a big technical debt mess.
Yeah, I think it's the digital hygiene. I think you said that earlier, like controlling what it's like our like eating habits. Like some people just grab go to sort of, let's say, neighborhood liquor store or whatever, the corner store, and like grab any candy they can get their hands on and eat, right? And some people are very conscious about eating, and it's just the conscious consumption of technology we need to do in order to reduce technical debt, I think, in that context, right? So, yeah.
So, hey, Sarbjeet, question for you and Don, because Don, you were talking about multiple ERPs. Wherever I've worked, there are multiple CRMs, multiple CMS systems. Everything is multiple. Even marketing technologies is multiple. Like most of the organizations, because it's so sexy that everybody wants to go and invest into MarTech stack these days. So is having multiple CRM systems, you also call that as a tech debt?
It can be. I actually don't think that there is a one size fits all. I also don't think there should be one ERP system. If it makes sense to have two, then and that's the best decision, then that's fine, because you might have two very different divisions that work very differently. But it should be, as Sarbjeet was saying, it should be a conscious decision. It should be, you've decided that's the best way to go. It's not technical debt, right? That is a strategic approach that you've adopted, not something that's been enforced upon you through mergers and acquisitions and rogue groups going off and saying, we don't like Salesforce, we want to bring in Sugar CRM because we think it works better for us. Although I don't necessarily have a problem with it, as long as overall you've got your organization's running better because of that, right? Although that's usually not the case.
Yeah, there is a term actually I'm trying to coin and put it out there, is that the feature proximity. When you need another feature to do your business, it's not existing in existing software. What do? You go buy another ERP system because just you need that one feature. You
don't buy them anymore. You just subscribe to them, right? So it's easy to. It's very the slippery slope, right? You can just get it and go. That's the SaaS. These days
you subscribe to these things, and then a subscription, they can give you little dose. It's like drugs these days. The software is like drugs. They give you a little dose, and you get addicted, and you can't get rid of that addiction, right? So and the problem happens on the back end when you have to integrate the data from different SaaS providers. It can be ERP or not ERP, right? So it can be system of record or system of engagement, or what we call the new breed of systems of innovation, if you will. So yeah, I just love the pace layered approach, actually, which Gartner wrote about, I think, 15 years back, some papers on that there are 3 types of systems and how they interact with each other, and what their lifespans are, and how fast they move, and what kind of technology happens in those areas and stuff like that. I think it helps us divvy up the problem. And in certain areas, we will embrace the technical debt, which is a fast-moving systems. Those are systems of innovation. We are experimenting, right? But in systems of record, if you have technical debt, you are in deep shit, I think, because those things are hard to change, and they take many times millions and millions of dollars to upgrade to the next level and so forth. So yeah, I think who joined? Tim just joined. Tim, hi Tim, you missed all the fun. We're having fun here. So welcome. I mean, I don't want to we want to warm you up, but like what we're talking about at this point is like how the new stack actually helps or hurts technical debt, Tim, and what causes it, where the definitions come from, and how do we define it. Different people have different vantage points, like a CTO, how the CTO looks at technical debt, how a developer looks at it, how somebody in ops looks at a CIO, let's say. What's your vantage point, and what are you? Let's give us your 2 cents to merge into this ongoing discussion, if you will.
Well, I think the general view that a lot of folks have is that tech debt is bad, and there are real reasons why you might have legacy, or some are calling it vintage equipment in play. And I mean, older stuff. The thing is, there's a lot of factors that you have to take into account. It's not as simple as just saying, okay, well, I'm running older gear or running legacy equipment or legacy architecture just because I'm lazy. I heard someone suggesting that, which just kind of fired me up and got me really frustrated, because it just shows the ignorance in what it takes to actually run an IT organization. There are a lot of factors that come into play. And so it's a very complicated thing. It's not as simple as just saying, oh, all tech debt is bad, and so therefore you should move on. There are good reasons to hold on to it. But there are people who do hold on to things a little longer than they should too. So the converse can be argued.
Yeah, actually, one thing because we use this term, part of the term is debt, right? Technical debt. And I was sitting down and thinking last evening, what are we financing? Like when we take on debt, right? We finance something. When I take debt, like I'm buying a home or a car or something like that, right? So what do we get by incurring that debt, right? So I think that's maybe another way to look at it. Like, what are we buying? Time? Are we buying time to market, or are we competing better because, are we making our brand look better because we're putting stuff out there faster? So what do we like? Should we look at this technical debt that way? Like, what are we financing? Why we are incurring this?
So as I see it, is we're taking a shortcut now to buy a product feature immediately. We're buying time so we can get it out the door now.
Yeah,
that's how I view it from a product manager perspective.
And as of late, actually, I hear this all the time. This saying that speed is the new scale, and that kind of stuff. Like in here in the Bay Area, like companies put on their walls like "move fast and break shit," stuff like that. You know who they are, right? So, like, I think that cultural shift actually also causes these kind of behaviors, which you kind of add to this problem. But overall, personally, I believe the new breed of technologies reduce the amount of technical debt we have, and the reason being that we have better technologies to integrate existing technologies. So we don't have to, for example, in ERP sort of case, we don't have to upgrade the whole ERP. ERP is getting broken into smaller chunks, right? Now, the new name for the ERP is low code, no code. That's how I see it. You guys have any comments on that?
I'll jump in a little bit, Sarbjeet. I think to step back for a second, I think we have to also be clear when we talk about technical debt, what's the magnitude of it? Is something broken, or is it just ugly?
Yeah.
And sometimes there's some things that are still working. So I'm talking to you guys on the 2012 MacBook Pro, and I've had people that have called me out when I do consulting engagements. And how old is that thing? Do you actually have a DVD slide in it? And I produce millions of dollars of value for companies off of this old laptop that doesn't even have a working battery anymore. So could I have upgraded? Yes. I'm more productive because I've got a newer machine. No, but here's the other part too. I think we have to consider with old MacBooks and old cars. I've got a 2008 Honda Accord. People similarly talk about me for that too. Sometimes the new stuff has better features, Sarbjeet, but the maintenance is worse. So if you look at, I actually talked to a mechanic about this, had a long conversation. Stuff prior to 2010 is actually easier to maintain than things built in the past 5 to 10 years. Because even if the part doesn't fail, the sensor fails, and you've got to be in the dealership now fixing something that was supposed to make it easier. So what are we really enabling? Again, is it broken or is it ugly? And what does the maintenance look like? Because the only thing that we know we guarantee now is change. Are we set up to be able to change, or is maintenance going to just make this thing go haywire?
Yeah, I think the hardest part for our industry is like not having the EOL, end of life, end of support kind of policies in place for most of the software. I mean, it's very rare I see with customers they have those policies written down. Like we bought this ERP and it will be EOL in 10 years or 20 years, whatever that happens to be, or any piece of software. There's nothing like that. So I think Grady Booch said that. I just love his work. He says software never dies. You have to kill it, right? So it never dies, really. So you have to really kill it and throw it away. Otherwise, it's going to lurk around. And sometimes we call those applications ghost applications. I've done a lot of work in the data center sort of rationalization and consolidation space during my EMC VMware days, doing data center audits and all that sort of consolidation, M&As kind of related work. Like we see these ghost applications all the time. Like people know there's an application, nobody knows what it's being used for, who's using it, what's the usage of it. Like to see the usage of the older application. Newer applications are better. We can take a look at logs, and we have a lot of telemetry data and all that stuff. And the older applications we don't. So they don't want to pull the plug because something can break. They don't even know what will break if they pull the plug on that server, right? So the problem is that dire in certain situations.
Well, but I think, Sarbjeet, I think one of the questions that you have to ask yourself, and this is not a question that I see coming up enough, is why? Why is that a ghost application? I mean, do you understand the reason why? Not necessarily you personally, but do you understand how you got to that point? And I think that's just as important or more important than the fact that it is a ghost application. And this kind of gets back to the culture and how you got to that application and how you implemented that application and how you manage applications and infrastructure in general. Are you curating them, or are you just, as I call it, running with scissors? And what I mean by that is there are a phenomenal number of IT organizations that run in this project mode of we implement and we move on because we don't have the resources to manage it. We're not able to build that culture to curate and manage that footprint. And so they're running from one thing to the next to the next. I'm not saying that that's right or wrong. I'm just saying it's the reality of how organizations are operating still today. Now, when you move into more of a curation model or a product model or over project, then that dynamic changes demonstrably, right? Because now you start thinking about I was doing this in one role where we thought of Microsoft Exchange as a product. And we operated it accordingly. And we knew that it was going to cycle with new versions every so often. And so when you start to get into that mode, it forces your thinking to change within the organization, but you also avoid those situations of ghost applications, of dilapidated equipment and architecture and thinking. And when you do have older applications or infrastructure in play, as Bobby was talking about, there's a very specific reason why, and you can articulate that business reason why, right? It's not just, hey, you know what, I'm carrying this tech debt. I hate that term, but I have this older system in place for a very good reason, and that reason still exists today.
I think Tim nailed it. Like, let me come close to something that I see happening in enterprise a lot. We get recognized for new stuff, but one of the hardest things to do in the enterprise is burn off the old stuff. To sunset a system, to actually kill it. And part of the reason why there are almost no executives that want to sign their name up to that, you do not want $1 million of your $2 million budget to be regression testing to show that you didn't break anything, right? You want to innovate and do the new stuff. And so When you look at legacy systems, Sarbjeet, it's not just the legacy development, it's the legacy testing, it's the legacy validation, it's moving the data. That's the stuff that's really, really hard. And you feel like, honestly, you're like a cornerback in the NFL, your name's only going to be called because you screwed up.
Yep.
You got burned for a touchdown, and that's going to be what you get recognized for. Like, it doesn't feel like the juice is worth the squeeze, so you're not going to have, this is probably a little controversial, your best leaders are not going to be put on turning stuff off or saving money. They're going to be put on spinning up new stuff and making more money.
Yeah, you also have to think about the risk. You have to think about the risk associated with turning off that application. And I've been down this path, I don't know how many times, and I got to tell you, it's not worth it. The juice isn't worth the squeeze. And so guess what you do? You move on.
Yeah, that's the hard part. You move on, leaving that application there for long time, longer than what it needs to be. I think it comes back to the constant hygiene around application management, application portfolio management, which people don't read. I see time and again, they don't revisit application portfolio every, let's say, even 5 years. Like, they will do it only if there's M&A or somebody's buying them or somebody is doing their due diligence, like what kind of shit you have under the hood kind of thing, right? So otherwise they don't. It's a big problem. Let's go around the table, around the screen these days. Like just 1 or 2 points, like the parting sort of tips for everybody else, listeners who are listening right now or will listen later to these recordings and stuff like that. Like, what do you recommend, like having what policies in place or what kind of practices in place in order to address this problem?
So I'll go. So I would manage technical debt and keep it simple by managing it like you would your finances. Know what's out there and how much you owe by application or by system. Make sure you pay your bills each month. Make sure you have a calendar that of when you need to make those payments. Deciding on a minimum payment. Things like deciding what to pay off first. And those are just some examples. And what I mean by that is strategize with those concepts, those simple concepts in mind. And I think that would help go a long way for some organizations. And as I consult in the government sector, those are the kinds of principles that I bring.
Who wants to go? Bobby, you want to go next? Hello? Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
You can hear me? Okay. Bobby, we cannot hear you. We cannot hear you.
How about now?
Okay.
Sorry. I'll go back to something we talked about on Twitter, Sarbjeet. I think we're falling in love with the tech too much, and it still comes back to the people, right? So technical debt, I don't like to have. Data debt, I don't know what we have. Brain debt, I don't know what we want. And in a lot of cases, we're adding new tools and new remedies, and we haven't figured out what we want for dinner. That's back to the leadership part. Like, what is it that we're trying to actually do? And so better questions are really the problem, not better tools and utilities. So here's one, for example. If you think about like a restaurant, do I need to make a mediocre thing better or make a good thing faster? What problem am I really trying to solve? I'll give a really specific point, right? If going back to like the State of the Cloud report, if you look at all the different things that are happening, right? How you choose is more important than what you choose, because you're always going to have too many choices that are coming out, right, almost daily. But one that I've seen pretty proven is database as a service, right? If you're looking for higher level services that maximize the value and minimize the risk, database as a service is one of the best ways to do it, because you've got predictable outcomes, meaningful output, and it's not like a whole scale refactor where the juice isn't worth the squeeze. So that's where I would leave the audience.
Thank you. Todd, you next, and Tim.
Next in line. Hello. Identification and communication of your opportunity cost. I think that the IT sector brought this on themselves over the last 30 plus years of maintaining the cards close to the chest. So as a business person, I want to know the bottom line. What is this going to cost me, regardless of what department the expense is coming from? So it is a leadership issue. And I think we're going to have to look to younger folks. I'm 56, so I'm on my way out. We got to look to the younger crews to really implement culture. So it is fixing it. But again, what is the opportunity cost, period?
And Tim?
So, I think there have been some great comments from the others, but I'll just say, in addition to those, understand what you have. I think a lot of times folks don't understand kind of what they're responsible for and what they have. And kind of a play on what Bobby was saying earlier, but I'll put it a slightly different way, which is understand where you're going and why you're headed in that direction and what needs to be in the car on the way there. That will help give you guidance and understanding what the value is that this equipment, whether it's applications, architecture, people, culture, organization. On Twitter, I mentioned a whole litany of different things to think about. This goes well beyond just infrastructure and applications. When you talk about vintage or tech debt or whatever legacy, whatever you want to call it, but understand what you have and what you're going to need going forward. And especially as you start to think about how your customer is changing, how your business operations are changing, how your data is changing, all of these will come into play, and it will start to paint a picture of how this evolves over time. And that's the other piece here is this isn't just a point in time, make a decision and stick with that decision for the next 5 or 10 years. We have to constantly be evolving. And that is something new for IT, more so than it ever has been.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, gentlemen. Actually, thank you for all these comments. And we know that this is a pretty vague kind of topic to talk about. Vague in the sense that there's so many ways we can look at it, and not a lot of people maybe have heard this term if they have not been in the pure development sort of area or pure hardcore tech. And if somebody's listening, I hope they got some value out of it. In my departing thoughts are, I think having that digital hygiene or just applications hygiene or application portfolio hygiene, it goes a long way. Like that conscious consumption of technology, when you bring in something and think about it, I always say that technology is like medicine. Every pill has a side effect, right? So you bring in something and then it's going to give you some side effects, right? And you're addressing that problem and then you're taking another pill. So you have to shed some other older pills what you're taking to take on the new pills. Otherwise you're drugging yourself, kind of thing. My analogy, poor analogy there. So thanks everybody for listening, whoever listened, and we will put out these links on Twitter and stuff like that later as we progress, and the discussion will continue. Thanks, guys. We're ending it here right now.
Thanks, guys. Have a good weekend. Take care.
Thank you.
You too.
Peace.
Thanks, guys. Bye. Ciao.